This is CyberSound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity, with your hosts, Jason Pufall, Stephen Maresca, and Matt Fusaro.
Welcome to CyberSound. I'm your host, Jason Pufall. Joined as always, Steve Maresca and Matt Fusaro.
Hey, everyone.
Hi.
So I feel like this is a complicated topic because it's sort of top of mind for a lot of people. We put our heading down. AI, friend or foe. Maybe that's a little sensationalized, but I don't know. There's definitely groups, and we can talk about this specifically. Certainly, groups of people who are advocating for the sort of slowdown or halting of development around AI. I think people are concerned about maybe advancing too quickly and posing a threat, right? That the foe side of things. But I think we also should cover, some of those really positive applications that we're already seeing for, ChatGPT and image recognition and some of the stuff that Microsoft is doing, to talk about, maybe where it can be a friend if we wanted to do that. So it's developing quickly. We talked a little bit early on in our conversations internally here around, is it similar to blockchain? There's tons of hype around blockchain, and I don't want to say there's been no practical applications. That of course wouldn't be fair, but I don't think applications that hit the mainstream the way some of the AI
immediate utility.
Yeah. And I think that's been the limiter for blockchain in a lot of ways was how does the normal person take advantage of blockchain, right? And I think the answer largely is they kind of can't. With AI though, how many people in 3 days logged into ChatGPT and got utility out of it? Now, whether they got true value or it was just sort of, sort of something unique that they played with, right? But they could access it and they could do something and they could produce something. It was fascinating how quickly this emerged and the hype around it.
Yeah, I think it was the most heavily adopted application ever on all platforms.
Overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah, unbelievable. And now it's ChatGPT 4, I believe, is the most current version still, right? Huge investment by Microsoft. I mean, they certainly see where this can go. But there's people who are saying that we're developing it. It's getting too intelligent too quickly, and it poses a threat.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not aware, I believe there were over, I think they said somewhere around 1,000 different tech leaders, whatever that means. Yeah. Probably people with the most money in their pockets. But they put a petition together to slow down AI, whatever that means. I don't know how you enforce that or what have you, but they're looking to slow it down or halt it for a bit. I think mostly they're citing concerns of responsible development of it.
Yeah, I think what they were proposing was a brief pause of new training relative to data sets sourced from the internet, and basically a creating of a charter or of sorts to define responsible use of technologies like that.
And anybody who's doing any substantive development in the space, typically on their informational pages, web pages, they'll talk about their adherence to responsible development practices, which I think is largely in some way constraining the tool that it can't run rampant. I mean, there's a real fear.
The difficulty that's cited is that training models are somewhat desirable if they behave in slightly unexpected, evolutionary, chaotic ways.
The whole purpose.
Right. Therefore, you can make that sort of assertion if you're marketing, but you cannot, with a technical underpinning, make that assertion in fact.
Yeah, you can't push those boundaries if you don't allow it to evolve is the term. Probably.
I mean, it's sort of it doesn't apply quite biologically, but the notion is the same anyway. And is there a risk? Probably, potentially.
Probably.
By the same token, a lot of the training models might be evolutionary dead ends, to extend the analogy. They may not function. That's equally likely to something being generated that's useful, and the probability of something coming out that's harmful is not really possible to ascertain.
Right. I mean, we have seen. So you spoke about the tech leaders that have asked to slow down the development, and I think the way you framed it, probably your position a little bit is it's financially motivated. They want an opportunity to catch up, I suspect.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of that. Don't get me wrong. I think that it's probably not a bad idea to slow it down, kind of just do some checks and balances on it. Because like we were just talking about, there's some danger to this, but like all things, there's probably a money aspect to it.
Right.
I think that there are other motivations that are articulated to slow things down too, because there are vast, well-established workforces that are fearful of being displaced.
Right.
We're talking about people's livelihoods, the perceived value of their contribution to society. Essentially, the fear that well-established norms of interaction and our purpose will be disrupted by something that takes away what we see as fulfillment or what we as people use as part of our identities. I think that's partly behind the blocking of Italy to ChatGPT. I think it has to do with privacy as well. But, ultimately that's also at the background of these conversations. Is it a tool that is useful, or will it fundamentally change the nature of human society in a way that's not a net positive? I think that's the thought process behind it. That's not something we can answer, right?
Well, Warren Buffett says no. So,
but you're saying the statement around the blocking and the privacy implications is tied to will it improve society in a net positive? Are you saying?
In part, but I think that there are fears of disruption in the actual intellectual worker class.
Right. There absolutely will be
fears of displacement and the fears of being obviated. I think is the main crux.
I think you could see that in a couple of days of using ChatGPT just to write articles and collect data. We've talked about security education, I think, and the ability to do your own research and understand whether or not you're being presented with factual data. That's a huge risk with the tool as it stands today. I think as people gain more and more trust in it, they'll be more and more likely just to trust what it gives them. And I think there's a real risk there. But the fact is, it writes better than a lot of people. It writes better than a lot of people that I read their writing of. I get people drafting documents all the time that are considerably poorer than what ChatGPT can produce. It's going to change things, and maybe things slow down development-wise. They're certainly not going to halt. This ship has sailed, and there's enthusiasm in this space that we haven't seen before.
Yeah. I think that a likely outcome of technology like this is sort of a balkanization of both the tech and the international sphere as it pertains to national opinions about such technology. There will be some that completely avoid it because they want to preserve the status quo for various reasons while accepting inefficiency and all the things that might be associated with the benefits of having it. And there will be some that wholly, completely endorse and dive right in. Right. So even if there is some sort of compact to cease development, those who don't act as signatories are free to behave as they see fit. I don't think it will stop advancement in the way that is desirable. What it might produce realistically is a compartmentalized world where you confine the most risky applications of tools like this to air-gapped networks and things of that variety. That's likely a requirement, maybe in law, maybe in practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, higher education has a real issue with it right now for a lot of good reasons.
Right, and there are plagiarism detectors or AI generated detectors. I'm not sure how good they are.
Supposedly they don't work very well against the newer models. which I can see why.
As they develop, right? I
Yep.
mean, we said cat and mouse in one of our earlier podcasts. I think it's sort of similar here in that regard.
Yep.
So let's segue a little bit though, because what I don't want this to be is totally a podcast around should we cease development? What are the risks? We're seeing some really interesting applications come out of it. I think obviously everybody's familiar with ChatGPT. That's the thing that got all this started. There's the image generation tools that are out there, a whole variety of those. I think one of the things that I know, Matt, you're interested in following is the Copilot tool that Microsoft has released, right? And I think we're looking at that specifically because it's sort of security related, kind of the intent of the podcast. But maybe spend a minute on that if you would.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see how how Microsoft took the GPT-4 model and kind of hooked it up to their security ecosystem. Microsoft did it was one of their events where they were unveiling products, and they kind of showed how by using basically a ChatGPT, it was able to do an entire forensic investigation into a ransomware attack without anyone being involved. So it detected it made an attack story, it made a PowerPoint presentation for executives to look at, it isolated the host that had an issue, and then remediated it, right? Soup to nuts.
Soup to nuts.
That's amazing, right? That's something that we've been striving for a long time in security, because having that type of rapid response is crucial, especially in a ransomware attack. But then you get back to it's going to make mistakes sometimes, right? They even say during their presentations, this is not perfect, but it's a good tool to use right now, right? It's going to help you out, which I agree. Having more tools available to get to answers quicker, or to summarize things, or to do slightly mundane tasks like make a PowerPoint presentation so that everybody else knows what's going on. Taking those things out of daily life is good, I think. But like we said before, it's going to depend on an operator that is paying attention, knows what they're doing, and knows whether or not the results are what they should be, right?
So, the interesting thing, because Steve, you had mentioned before, the concern around reducing the need for knowledge workers. In a way, you can make the argument that this actually lets people get into a space that might otherwise be really difficult. Right?
I'd agree.
Yeah.
It could make the same demographics that are fearful of being displaced far more effective in applying their knowledge. I think that is a very reasonable argument to make, because it cuts out the inefficiencies of the mundane tasks and gets you to just making decisions with better information. It's the framing of what we're talking about more than anything else.
I mean, if Copilot can do what you just described, so essentially detect, provide you data on the how an attack was executed, and then we'll set the PowerPoint stuff aside. If you can produce that for a more junior analyst, now they've got something to look at that they can maybe validate, rather than try to assemble from scratch, which is hugely valuable.
Right.
And I think really does open the space up to people who might not have the experience that you typically need to do that kind of work.
Yeah, it's kind of a continuous learning thing for them too. A lot of times a tier 1 analyst may not know that they're supposed to go look at certain pieces of information or how to access them at all, really. Having something there to kind of coach you along is pretty valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, and now, of course, I'm assuming when it did that investigation, it did it all within the Microsoft ecosystem, right? Probably using the Microsoft tools.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's
designed by them.
It's a Microsoft product, so they're going to keep it in their ecosystem.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's ways to plug other data into things like that.
I mean, just for folks who don't know, OpenAI has a lot of other capabilities.
Right.
One example that is what I think of as an offshoot when we talk about Copilot is their Whisper model. It's a speech recognition system trained on better part of 1 million hours of multilingual speech. It is astonishingly good for transcription, for interpretation of text. It's possible to put that model in a Raspberry Pi. For those who don't know, a very, very lightly powered, battery-powered, potentially microcontroller. Something far less capable than your phone, and turn it into something that could be an assistant.
Right.
Like, Hollywood's notion of what AI was 25 years ago is right over the horizon with low-powered equipment today. That's where we're heading. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there for curated learning, for guided investigations, an extension of stuff like Copilot
I
to
think
say,
that's what I'm referring to.
Hey,
exactly.
like being able to verbally say, hey, I don't understand this finding. Elaborate.
Yep.
That all by itself, verbally, with no prompting textually. I mean, that's where we're headed. And that's a hugely interesting, encouraging path.
The challenge. So now we're segueing a bit, but we, in my house, we had a discussion around statistics. My wife, my son, and I won't get into like why, it doesn't matter. But frankly, none of us are statistics people. We don't have the background in it. And we asked ChatGPT, can you develop a statistical model that meets the criteria that we gave it? And it gave an incredibly detailed answer that probably was accurate. But the fact is, I have no way of validating it. That'll be a challenge. And I think, sort of jumping off what you just described, if you have no foundational understanding, because candidly, my background in statistics is pretty light, and this was pretty complicated. I think what it told me was great, but I have to find somebody to say, what it gave you is actually accurate. And I don't know how you get to the point where you can take the output and truly trust it. That'll be interesting to see how that develops. And maybe you can't. Maybe you ultimately just have to have some trust in things that are straightforward like that. But
I don't really have any theories. I think we'll return to some sort of proof-driven reality, because honestly, if you can't point directly from origin, the prompt you're giving a system like this, to the conclusion in a discernible path, even if it's contorted, as long as it's explained and you can get from point A to point B, that's a better place than having no understanding of the path. Right. And that's kind of the place we're in right now.
And I'd say that was the exact outcome.
Yeah.
You got a couple of good pages of really detailed notes that I felt like, well, it's probably right. I think that answers our question, but I guess it's better than the starting place, which was no ability beforehand. So,
yeah, I mean, I think my big takeaway from how all of this is going is it's not going anywhere. Find ways to use it properly, right? Find ways to integrate it into what you're doing responsibly, because frankly, if you don't, and the rest of the world is, you're going to be left behind, right? I know a lot of people kind of are shaking their fist at it right now, but it's not going to go anywhere.
No, they shouldn't. This is the Matt's hot take section.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
for sure.
One of the most interesting things that I've seen, and kind of the reaction to what you're saying, is annotated models that produce sort of like the back end thought process, so to speak, for the content produced. Being able to say, this is a supposition. I don't have facts to back it up.
Right.
But I'm assuming that there is this fact that's not part of the prompting or the data set that I have, therefore I'm making an inference. That by itself may help massively to sidestep some of the problems we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because it's honesty about guesses being made versus things being decided upon fact.
It's such an interesting thing that you're bringing up, though, because I don't think most people care about that, and I think that's the reason people are so nervous about it. Is I do think the enthusiasm over the tools as they exist now is that they feel like they're conversing with you. They feel like people feel like they're getting accurate information with very, very, very little effort, and they trust it. And I don't think that's going to go away.
But people are very appreciative if I tell them I don't know, and if they hear me say that, it changes the interpretation of the conversation we're having in a way that makes it understood there's sort of a shared responsibility in navigating.
I agree and disagree with you at the same time. I think that would be helpful to have that annotated in there. But at the same time, I don't think people will interact with it the same way they do a human, right? When it says I don't know, you assume it's broken.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
This isn't working for me.
Yeah,
Right.
it's fair.
That's not what you think when you talk to a person, though.
And the deficiencies of all of these platforms today can be benefits with the right framing and coaching.
Right.
You know, if a generative AI platform emits something that it thinks is the appropriate output, maybe if I know that fact, I can backhaul that to my prompt and say, I can fix my question. I didn't ask it correctly.
Right.
The tools need to be used appropriately. Otherwise, honestly, you get garbage out if you put garbage in, and that's this truism for all of computing's history.
So you've got these tools though that are accessible to everybody. Not everybody can formulate their questions, can update their questions based on what they've just received as an answer. Like there's a lot of expectations that you have there.
I can use a chainsaw. You do not want me cutting down your tree.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, fair. I mean, fair enough. It'll be interesting to see tools that are accessible to the entirety of the population, how they develop, what the trust in them is. And I think the trust is higher than it should be right now. And I don't expect that to change probably. I'm really enthusiastic about things like a co-pilot. And really there's a whole other project. There's a whole ton of projects out there that are using AI. And there's some fascinating uses here. And coming back to the blockchain for a second, like we were all interested in crypto and blockchain, and we watched all that stuff pretty closely. It was always hard to get really enthusiastic because it felt so niche, and it felt like people were just searching for ways to integrate blockchain. Where with AI, it just feels like there's a million opportunities there. So yeah, of course they are, and I think they're still searching, right? What'd you say? Medical records was one locate, right?
Yeah,
but there's a handful, I think, that have really materialized. So I don't know if we've answered anybody's burning AI questions, or whether or not we've committed to it being a friend or a foe necessarily. But I think this is an interesting space, one that we're going to watch develop. We're seeing develop now. Like this is a forefront technology this minute. In fact, I would say if we went back a year, probably about a year, we had our discussion around AI in security projects.
It was machine learning at the time.
Well, we batted back and forth, right? We compared and contrasted the two, but all of us were not that bullish on AI. And I think a year we've seen huge changes in that, where now we're having a conversation around the potential value of AI relative to a forensics investigation for ransomware, right? I mean, what a change in a year. I think the next year is going to be hugely different than this.
We have no idea what's coming.
No idea. So we're prognosticating, right? Like Matt's hot take. That's what I feel like.
We're reading the podcast.
You are the crystal ball in the center of the table. That's what it feels like. So I mean, this is a topic where I feel really good about saying if everybody wants to talk about it, like we don't have all the answers, but we're certainly interested and we're certainly watching it, as I think a lot of people in the space are. So if there's a conversation to be had, this is probably a good one, and we're happy to have it. So, and if nothing else, we hope you found this podcast interesting, because there's a lot to uncover here. Thanks for listening.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn or on Twitter at Vancord Security. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.